it used to be Larwill Park. And Larwill Park used to be one of the city's grand gathering places, a fantastic place that between about 1901 and 1950 was the place where the carnivals happened in the city. It was the place where the protests happened. It was where there were military displays and all sorts of marches, Ferris wheels, and the whole works. And so you should know that for more than half a century, this particular site served as one of the city's finest gathering areas. It was tended to by a guy named Al Larwill, who started out as a squatter who had a little shack in the corner of the site, and whose spirit, I think, whose generosity rivaled that of another great Vancouverite, Joe Fortes, but whose name, unfortunately, is now pretty much all but forgotten. In its time, Larwill Park saw a full spectrum of activity until the site itself got sold by the Parks Board to the city and then leased out as a bus depot and then buried under concrete, and the rest, of course, is history. And then, of course, the other preeminent side of things is Robson Square, which is the most unsquare-like square you're likely to find in a major city. It is all odd corners and angles, sunken parts. It has little bits of history inserted into it. The great sunken area that we're standing in now was once contemplated to be a subway station. So all sorts of history inserted into the discussion there. And it still serves, as Heather alluded to earlier, as the cornerstone of our public participation in a lot of democratic activity, a lot of artistic activity. And in fact, if you think about the idea of the art gallery as a cultural site, sometimes there's more culture going on the steps out front than there is inside. And by the way, that's actually a good thing in a healthy, vibrant city, because there's a lot of culture that takes place inside the art gallery, but we want to make sure that there's also a lot of spillover, a lot of vibrant, ground-up, rooted activity. So our position, I guess, in so much as it exists, is that whatever happens with these sites is that we need to maintain and enhance quality public gathering space in the city, and that should be a fundamental driver of the discussion. If the site stays, then let's think strategically about how we could turn the whole area, again, Sears building included, into something really stellar. Maybe some further adaptive reuse. Maybe we can look again at some of those conversations that have taken place and some of the work that's happened there. And if there is a move, then let us say for the record that the Rattlesnake building ought to remain as public as possible. We don't necessarily need the doors being shut further. We've already got one set that are closed pretty permanently as it is too, in fact, I guess, if you think about it. So we want to make sure that the space itself remains as public as possible. And I think, in a sense, from the conversations I've had, that will actually address a lot of the concerns that people have had about the loss of the art gallery, because sometimes that discussion seems to get equated with the loss of the building, as if the building itself will disappear. I think there's a way that we can actually functionally separate those discussions. Let's also make sure, if we are going to think about moving or staying, that we attend to some of the bigger picture questions as well. I think there is an awful lot of conversation on the table about the notion of a precinct. I do have some issues with that term. But let's think about it a little bit more. Let's think about what we could do to actually enhance the notion of culture in the city, as Joost and my previous colleagues spoke. I don't necessarily believe that moving the art gallery to the Larwill site will necessarily make a cultural precinct. I don't think adding the theater that's there or the CBC building into the mix, as has been presented today, necessarily makes the precinct. I think there's an awful lot more that we could do there. So let's have that discussion. Let's think about how we could think bigger and longer term. And I'd say not just 30 years, but even further still. Because what we are looking at with that particular site, and also with the Georgia Street site, is two places right smack dab in the heart of a fast-growing city, one of the most popular places to live in Canada, one of the places that attracts people from around the world because of its planning and cultural activities. We're growing in leaps and bounds. You know, when people were talking about the Olympics a few months ago, they were saying, well, this is great, we've got 150,000 more people here, look, the streets are packed, it's vibrant, we're having an amazing time. But you know what? We're going to get 150,000 more people here in the city on our own. Every 5 years when the census comes out, we grow by about 30,000 people. So think about it, if you do the math, we're not far off from that. So what can we do to make sure that our cultural institutions and our public spaces meet what will be an inevitable increase in demand, and how can we do that in a really good way? We are also talking about a fantastic new neighborhood unfolding down on the Falls Creek area, the Northeast Falls Creek. Probably another 10,000 people are going to be going into there. A critical need for more open spaces, not just in that area, because right now the discussion around parks is locating them underneath the viaducts. But how can we connect all sorts of interesting spaces in the city so that the newcomers and the new inhabitants will have good places to gather? And then let's think also about the possibility of doing some other strategic stuff that's been on the table, like getting rid of the viaducts and making connections between downtown and the water's edge. These are all things that I think could be part of the discussion around things like the art gallery, because the art gallery will actually activate a lot of those changes. It'll be strategically placed no matter where it is. So that's a bit of the plug for thinking about the larger public realm questions of the longer picture context and so on. I think there are a few other things that I would like to put on the table for people to think about that have come to our attention as issues. I think the discussion around iconic architecture is fantastic. There was a few discussions that I believe Gord moderated a little while ago about whether or not Vancouver needs iconic architecture, more of it, less of it, what it means, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing? I moved here from Toronto where the name of the game for about 10 years was kind of like a quaint movie, Chasing Frank Gehry. It was a great story watching it unfold and kind of funny, but at the same time, it also led to a fantastic gallery there. We have questions around public benefits that will come out of this. We have questions around spending priorities. There's all sorts of things we could be spending several $100 million on. We also have questions around process, and maybe that's a good place to leave it. I'm still on island time, don't worry, Gord. And that is, I think, you know, from the process side of things, there's a couple of things that would probably help our discussion. One, it would be great if the province would stop acting unilaterally around art galleries, big spaces, stuff like that, because that would really help if we could have a bit more of a local process around that. Two, I think it's also a little bit problematic that we're dealing with this, in some respects, rhetorically as if it's a done deal. And I think the dialogue here is helping to break that apart, but if you read the ads or look at the website, you kind of get the impression that it's already kind of in the bag, and I think that actually sends a bad message to people if we're really genuine about trying to engage people in this process. Three, thank you. Can we play a big game of Tetris? Because every time I go to the Vancouver Museum, it's so lonely over there. Their numbers actually go down in the summer. Possibly we could think about jiggling some stuff around. So something useful to put on the discussion there. And four, you know what, an election's coming up. If all else fails, let's put it on a ballot. That'll be fun too. I'll leave it there.